Initiation by Elisabeth Haich, Chapter 42, Roo-Kha and the 12 Pills. All that happened next came so fast that it seemed like a dream in my memory. I began to pass on to the people around me the truth that I had learned from Ptahhotep in the temple. More and more people came to my lectures, like thirsty wanderers in the wilderness, seeking to draw living waters and to quench their thirst with the deep secrets of initiation into the divine self. From that time on, my work has been the same. I stand at the beginning of an infinitely long pathway, while at the other end there stands the radiant form woven of light, the creative cosmic self, awaiting each and every traveler with open arms. I stand there and I point the way to the countless sheep who seek the light and wander on side by side slowly forward, ever onward towards that form of light, just the way I'd seen it in my visions in the Dolomites. Outside, in the three-dimensional world, my karma, which created my character and my fate, ran onward according to the laws of time and space. I was alone with my task, without a guide from whom I might receive advice, just like everyone has to be alone who wants to develop into an independent, resourceful, reliable co-worker in the great plan. Only at rare intervals, when I had reached a great turning point in my life, did I again receive help and direction from the higher powers which guide the course of the earth. Even then, I still had to solve all my problems. As the years went by, however, things happened now and again to remind me of my experiences in Egypt. Once, when I was in a far country for the first time to take part in a big international conference, I met someone I'd known in Egypt. After my arrival, I entered a room in which a number of the convention participants had already gathered. I was really thinking of anything else but memories from my life in Egypt. But in this room I saw a man whom I recognized instantly, and for sheer surprise my heart began to beat faster. It was Roo-Kha. The man stood up, and although I refrained from expressing surprise by even so much as a twitch of a muscle, he showed his surprise as he looked at me, and then he bowed and he introduced himself. Klimka. We shook hands. We stood there for a moment in silence, and then he said with much embarrassment, "Strange, who you are really. I have the oddest feeling, just as if I should bow before you with outstretched arms right down to the floor. Very strange." He looked at me inquiringly. "Why do I have this odd feeling?" I answered, "You were my finance minister in the government of my father in Egypt." And I smiled. Those around us laughed heartily. They thought I was joking. But Mr. Klimka didn't laugh. He kept on looking at me in a quizzical, embarrassed way. And all throughout the convention, which lasted for several days, he always called me Queen. Again and again, as he looked at me so searchingly, he would mutter, "Strange, very strange." And in all our meetings during the convention, we talked together like two old friends. Another event of about the same period of my life stands out very sharply in my memory. One autumn evening, I went to bed as usual. I was dreaming something quite inconsequential when all of a sudden I seemed to be surrounded by bright light. Then in my dream, an automobile came speeding up and stopped right in front of me. Two men, dressed in white, looking like doctors, got out. One of them stepped up to me, pulled a spoon-like instrument out of his pocket, and used it to scoop my defective eye out of its socket. The other man pulled out a little vial and opened it, and took out a big round white disc that looked like a pill. Holding the pill up close for me to see, he said, "Don't be afraid. I'm now going to insert this disc in your eye socket. 12 of these must be consumed, and then you'll get your eye back. So don't be frightened at the idea that you will now apparently be blind in this eye." And then he inserted the pill in my empty eye socket, closed the eyelid, bandaged my right eye with the white cloth. I awoke early next morning and wanted to get up. And then I noticed I couldn't see a thing with my defective right eye. It was just as if a board had been placed in front of it. I ran to the mirror to look at my eye. With the other eye, which was still good, I could see that the pupil of my right eye had turned gray in color, and it was completely opaque. I knew it was a cataract. For several years, one had been developing slowly in my right eye, but its progress was slow and unnoticeable, and even yesterday I could still see pretty clearly. It was completely invisible from outside, and yet, now, in the space of only one night, the lens in my right eye had crystallized into a cataract. "Don't be afraid," my dream visitor's voice echoed in my memory. "No, I won't be afraid. I'll just have to begin again a series of pilgrimages from one professor to another, and sooner or later one of them will operate on my eye. Long ago I learned that it doesn't do any good to be afraid. But what is the meaning of these white pills? And what is the idea that by the 12 of them, what is meant by the idea that 12 of them are going to have to be used up in order to get my sight back again? How can that be?" I went to various famous professors. In their unanimous opinion, my right eye was operable immediately, but they all said that there was a danger. I would always have to wear dark glasses afterwards. This was because they were going to have to cut out a bit of the iris, which would give the pupil the shape of a keyhole, and because I was already 35 years old, they thought my eye would not be able to stand the exposure to more light through the enlarged pupil. So they advised me to wait with the operation, and I followed their advice. I kept on working, but I couldn't get used to working with one blind eye. The cataract bothered me greatly. Summer came, and as usual, we went to spend our holidays at our family villa on the lake. There I met a Catholic bishop who told me I should certainly go to Vienna and have the eye examined by a world-famous professor whom he personally knew. "He uses different techniques from the other doctors," said the bishop. "Go to him and ask for his advice. I am a servant of God, and perhaps God is giving you this advice through my mouth." By the time I had heard so much advice about my eye that I was nearly immune, but the bishop's words, "Perhaps God is giving you this advice through my mouth," made a deep impression on me. And when autumn came, my father accompanied me to the professor in Vienna. He recommended an immediate operation. "You should get this ugly, bothersome cataract out of your eye as fast as possible. Without any doubt, it's psychologically bad for you not to. Won't my eyes suffer greatly from the fact that you're going to have to cut out a bit of the iris?" He looked at me long and searchingly, and then tested my reflexes and began to talk about my sculpturing work, asking all kinds of things that had no connection with my eye. And then suddenly he said, "I won't cut out any of the iris. You can be assured your eye won't be so sensitive to light." "In that case, let's get the operation over as fast as possible," I answered. A week later, I was in the sanatorium, preparing for the operation, which was going to take place the following day. It was a glorious autumn evening, and before going to bed, I stepped over to the window to look out over the beautiful city below. As I drew the curtain to one side to look out the window, I saw the great round white disk of the full moon climbing slowly into the sky to the east. Instantly, I recognized the great white pill the doctor had given me in my dream. It was a full moon. The doctor had told me 12 will have to be used up. With my heart pounding with excitement, I started counting the time that had elapsed since that odd dream. Sure enough, 12 full moons had gone since that time. I knew the operation would give me back the sight of my eye. The next morning I lay on the operating table, and in an amazingly short time the operation was over. A light flashed in my blinded eye, and a moment later I saw a hand in front of it. "What do you see?" I heard the professor ask. "Your blessed hand, Professor," I answered. And a moment later both of my eyes were bandaged. As I was being wheeled out of the operating room, I heard the doors opening and closing and the soft voice of my father. "How was it, Esther?" "Good, Father," I answered. "I can see again." The operation brought me many interesting experiences, the most revealing of which was learning something more about the vibrations we call light, namely that these vibrations are only light for our eyes, and healthy eyes at that. In other respects, light is a tremendous force, big enough to kill a person or even stronger beings. It all depends on the relationship between the skin sensitivity of a living creature and the intensity of the light. This is what happened. A few hours after the operation, the professor came in and he said, "Don't be alarmed when I take the bandage off your eye. I have to see how it reacts to the light of a burning candle." I thought, why should I be alarmed? The doctor took off the bandage and said, "Now please open your eye." I was expecting to see a burning candle when I opened my eye, and instead I saw only darkness. But I felt a terrible blow on my newly operated eye. Jerking my head back, I closed my eye again. Couldn't understand what had happened. My doctor laughed reassuringly. "Didn't I tell you not to be alarmed? The retina of your eye is so sensitive right now that it doesn't pick up light rays as light, but it reacts to them as if they were being hit by a sharp blow. Just go on resting, and I'll come back in a few hours to examine your eye again. So far, everything's going just fine," he said, and he left. I remained alone in my darkness with plenty of time to think, what is light? And how is the same light I perceive with my healthy eye as the flickering flame of a candle? How can it cause me so much pain, as if I were being hit by a fist? I didn't see any light at all, but I did feel the wallop so strong it knocked my head back. From this, I was forced to conclude that if there were beings whose skin had the same sensitivity to light as the retina of my freshly operated eye, they could be struck from a great distance, perhaps even killed, by turning the light of a searchlight on them. Conversely, it is certainly conceivable that there could be some kind of light, for simplicity's sake we'll call it ultralight, that is so much stronger in its effect that the light that we're accustomed to seeing with our human eyes, that depending on the sensitivity of our skin, it could strike us down in the same way ordinary light would affect a being with a skin sensitive as the retina of my freshly operated eye. I realize that everything is relative, a question of the relationship existing between the operating force and the resistance it meets. This fitted in with the realization that there can be infinitely varied kinds of life existing on different planets and heavenly bodies throughout the universe. A creature similar to man living on Uranus or Neptune, because of the much greater distance between those planets and the sun as compared to the distance between the Earth and the sun, might conceivably have a skin as infinitely sensitive to light as my freshly operated eye. And if such a being on one of these distant planets were to see in sunlight in the same way we see here on Earth, his eyes would certainly have to be immeasurably more sensitive to light than ours are. But do we need to go so far away? The myriad creatures living in the depths of the ocean have such eyes and capabilities we cannot even begin to understand because we simply couldn't begin to exist in such dense darkness. In this vein, I went on meditating on the unlimited possibilities of worlds without end and of the different forms of life that they can contain. And the more I thought on these things, the more my heart felt with deep humility in the face of the power of the eternal being we call God. This eye operation brought me another very interesting and very valuable experience. Through it, I learned that the eyes take in light not only for themselves, but for the entire body, just as the lungs do with air and oxygen. Light is force. On the third day after my operation, the professor came in with a nurse and said, "Now it's time for you to get up and come over and sit in this armchair. Just put on your slippers and the nurse will help you." I was offended. "Doctor, I am not sick, and lying in bed for 3 days hasn't made me so weak I can't sit up and move about by myself. You don't need to help me." "Good," the doctor said. "Go ahead and get up by yourself if you can." I started to get out of bed, but I was in for a big surprise. My feet and legs were so weak, so powerless, that I would have sunk to the floor if strong hands had not seized me from both sides and held me up. My legs hung down like two limp rags, and my back was just as limp and powerless, so quite the opposite of what I expected. I was really glad for help in getting out of bed and over into the armchair. How was this? Then I heard the professor laugh. "You see, you couldn't get up alone. It's just because you were in complete darkness for 3 days. When a person is suddenly shut off from light, he loses strength so fast, he soon can't stand up alone anymore. You'll shortly be able to open your eyes again, and when you do, you'll find your strength returning quickly. One of the greatest problems during the war was how to help blinded soldiers, not so much because of their mental condition, but because of the complete debility which always and unavoidably accompanied their sudden blindness. The human soul is so wonderfully fashioned that a person always finds ways and means to survive such a tremendous catastrophe as sudden blindness, and he can even go on and discover new joys in life or new aspects of old pleasures. But our greatest problems arose from the fact that these poor young men weren't even able to stand on their own feet for a long time. It was not possible for us to give them back the blessing of light, but thank God for the elasticity and resiliency of the body. In time, a blind person's skin takes over the whole job of providing light through the body. The problem of blindness is always most acute right after it hits the victim, simply because of the weakness caused by the sudden absence of light. I was silent. Ever since my eye had been diseased, I had begun to understand the significance of blindness much, much better than one could have with two healthy eyes. Now, through my own experience, I came to understand the biblical passage. The light of the body is the eye. If then your eye is true, all your body will be full of light. But if your eye is evil, all your body will be dark. If then the light which is in you is dark, how dark it will be. And that quote is from Matthew 6:22-23. And my heart bled the more at the thought that mankind isn't even satisfied with the blindness which occurs in nature. Quite the contrary, he goes out himself to wage wars in which countless otherwise healthy people are blinded, maimed, crippled. When will humanity be mature enough to refuse to obey the tyranny of politicians who unconsciously sign declarations of war? 2 weeks later, the professor took me into a dark room to examine both my eyes. With a very strong lens before the eye he had operated on, I was able to read everything he put before me, even to the tiniest letters. And then, to my amazement, this dignified old professor jumped up and seized me with both hands and hoisted me high above his head. He was such a charming old fellow that I really couldn't understand what had gotten into him and why he was acting so strangely. As he gently set me back on the floor, his face was beaming as he said, "The technique that I used on operating on your eye has so far only been used for children and young people up to the age of 20. Beyond that age, there's a danger of inflammation of the iris, leading to total loss of vision in the eye. As you may remember, in your first consultation, I observed you closely, noting your extraordinary vitality and resilience. Your reflexes, too, were quite good. And, as I always do, I followed my intuition. With the courage of my convictions, excuse me, I operated on you as if you were still a child. So now you know why I'm so happy. The operation was a complete success. Your tissues were still young enough to come through this difficult operation in splendid form. So now you can go home with 2 healthy eyes and with my heartiest congratulations." I thanked him for his kindness, and we took leave of each other. And as I traveled homeward, I reflected on the 12 pills, which had to be consumed before the light would return to my blinded eye. And now it had.